My husband cheated because I couldn't get pregnant. He was infertile, so I filed for divorce. So for context, my husband Daniel, 32M, and I, Lauren, 29F, have been married for a little over 3 years, and we've been trying to have a baby for almost a year now. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked, and for the past few months, that failure has been tearing our marriage apart. I really want a baby, and I know he does too, or at least I thought he did. Daniel talked about starting a family constantly, even back when we were still dating. It was one of the biggest things we had in common. Wanting kids was one of the reasons we didn't waste time after getting married and started trying almost immediately. Every negative pregnancy test crushed me, but I always tried to keep it together. I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't lose it. I just swallowed the disappointment and moved on. Daniel didn't. Every single time we found out I wasn't pregnant, he'd get angry. Then he'd shut down completely and refuse to talk to me for days because he needed space. And every time he did that, it made me feel like this was somehow my fault, like my body was failing him. About 7 months ago, I suggested we both get fertility tests done. Even then, he was already acting out every month when nothing happened. He immediately shut the idea down and said we weren't going to waste money on doctors and tests. According to him, we just needed to keep trying. So we did. 3 weeks ago, after another negative test, I brought it up again. That's when things exploded. He snapped at me in the cruelest way possible and said he already knew who had the problem, and that he was only holding back because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. There was absolutely no reason for him to believe that. Neither of us had been tested, and that's what finally pushed me over the edge. I reminded him of how he acted every month, how he blamed me without ever saying it outright, when for all he knew, he could be the problem. That's when he told me he knew for a fact it wasn't him. And then he gave me an ultimatum. He said I could do something about this, or we'd have to go our separate ways. Because he wanted a baby, and if I couldn't give him one, then he didn't see the point of staying married to me. That broke something in me. I loved him. I would have stayed with him even if we never had kids. But it was painfully obvious that he didn't feel the same. At that point, I stopped feeling like his wife and started feeling like a defective baby-making machine. I was devastated just realizing that this was how my own husband saw me. So I stopped talking to him and decided I wouldn't say another word until he apologized. The apology never came. Instead, 3 days later, he left for a business trip, without even bothering to say goodbye. I was already miserable, but that hurt even more. The only thing that gave me a tiny sense of comfort was that he'd added the details of his trip to our shared iCloud calendar, which was something we'd always done whenever he traveled for work. I tried to go about my life, telling myself it would be fine. This was a longer trip than usual, and he was supposed to be gone for at least 10 days. On the 3rd day of his trip, I was scrolling through Instagram when I suddenly saw a post from his ex-girlfriend. She was sitting by a pool in a bikini, and the place looked way too familiar. On a hunch, I looked up the hotel Daniel was staying at. And sure enough, the pool area matched exactly what I'd seen in her post. I even called the hotel front desk to confirm whether she was staying there. They connected me to her room. Within seconds, I heard her voice asking who was calling. I didn't say a word. I just hung up. I tried to convince myself not to jump to conclusions, but deep down, I already knew. My husband was cheating on me with his ex. If I hadn't followed her on Instagram, and if they hadn't stayed friendly all these years, I never would have found out. That's when it hit me that he probably added the trip details to the calendar out of habit, not because he wanted me to see them. That thought was confirmed when, not long after I saw her post, the calendar entry suddenly disappeared. It didn't matter. I'd already seen it. I'd already screenshotted it like I always did. Daniel and his ex had dated for 2 years in college and broke up a few months before graduation. They stayed friends afterward. She even came to our wedding. I'd always found that a little weird, but Daniel reassured me that there was nothing there anymore. He said it was all in the past, and they only ever met in group settings. She traveled a lot anyway, so I never thought much of it. She'd been nice to me. I'd followed her on Instagram for years. I never imagined it would be the thing that exposed my marriage. Once I fully accepted that they were definitely together on that trip, I knew this marriage was over. I called a friend and asked him to connect me with a divorce attorney as soon as possible. He managed to do it overnight since he'd been divorced himself. I explained everything and asked the lawyer to draw up the papers immediately. I also decided to get a fertility test done. I had this gut feeling that there was nothing wrong with me, that Daniel had just been projecting his issues onto me. Within a week, I filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity and got my test results back. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. No fertility issues. No problems at all. Everything I'd suspected was true. And at that point, I couldn't wait for my husband to come home so I could shove those papers in his face and walk away for good. I kept myself busy during those days on purpose. I didn't give myself time to cry or spiral or feel sorry for myself. At that point, I had one goal and one goal only: let my husband walk straight into the consequences of his own actions. On the 11th day, Daniel finally came back. He walked into the house like nothing had happened. Calm, casual, like we were just another normal couple. He even apologized for the argument we'd had before he left and said he'd been thinking a lot during his trip. Then he told me he'd been looking into IVF recently and thought we should try that. I didn't respond to any of it. I went straight for the jugular and asked him where exactly he'd been staying during those 10 days. He hesitated, said he didn't remember the name of the hotel. I could literally see him struggling to come up with something believable. So I said the hotel's name out loud. He tried to shrug it off. That's when I mentioned that I'd seen a post on his ex-girlfriend's Instagram at the exact same place, which felt like a pretty strange coincidence. He tried to dodge the topic, but I didn't let him. I kept pushing until I finally asked him directly if he'd met his ex on that trip. He denied it immediately. So I just stared at him. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. I just looked at him for what felt like forever, probably 7 or 8 full minutes of silence. And eventually, that silence broke him. He finally admitted that he had met her, but claimed he hadn't told me because it would make me insecure and he didn't want to do that to me. I asked him what actually happened. He tried to change the subject again. I shut it down. After a while, he gave in and told me the truth, or at least part of it. He said he'd met his ex and slept with her, but only because he was frustrated. According to him, he'd asked her to meet him at the hotel the day before he left, and she'd agreed. His original plan wasn't even to hook up with her. It was to confirm whether he was the one with fertility issues. Back in college, they'd broken up after she accidentally got pregnant, and he'd always believed the pregnancy was his fault. He said he wanted closure, answers. Instead, she admitted that she'd been cheating on him back then and that the pregnancy might not have been his at all. He told me he was devastated. He wanted to fly back home immediately, but she convinced him to stay. And that's when they slept together, because apparently he fell weak after realizing that his last bit of hope was gone. He explained all of this to me in the calmest tone imaginable, like this was a perfectly reasonable chain of events. He even told me that going to his ex instead of getting tested made sense, because getting tested was terrifying and final. Sneaking around to meet his ex, asking about a pregnancy from years ago, and blowing up our marriage was somehow more convenient. Sleeping with her afterward was even more convenient. He then told me that after learning the pregnancy might not have been his, he finally went to a hospital during the trip and got tested. The results showed that he was the one with fertility issues, not me. On top of that, he realized that his ex had used him. She only stayed at the hotel for the first 5 days. After that, she left early, promised to keep in touch, and then blocked him everywhere the very next day. It wasn't emotional closure for her. It was a one-time thing. He said he was sorry. He said he was frustrated. He said he wanted a baby and a family so badly that he'd made a mistake. Then he looked me straight in the eye and told me that he knew he'd screwed up, but he was still willing to give our marriage one last chance, as if that was his decision to make. That's when I started laughing. I couldn't stop. I laughed while I handed him the divorce papers. I laughed while I handed him my fertility test results. And I laughed while he flipped through them in silence. He tried to say it was all unnecessary, that we could still make it work. I didn't respond. I already had my bags packed. I'd recorded the entire conversation on my phone. I didn't need to argue anymore. So I walked out. When he realized I was actually leaving, he dropped to his knees and begged me to forgive him. I ignored him, dragged my bags to my car, got in, and drove away, leaving him crying in the front yard. I drove straight to a friend's house. I'd already asked her beforehand if I could stay with her until the divorce was finalized, and she didn't hesitate for a second before saying yes. We've known each other since college, and most importantly, my husband has no idea where she lives, which meant he couldn't find me. It's been almost 3 days since I left. He's been texting me every single day, but I haven't opened a single message. Not one. I honestly thought he'd eventually give up. Instead, today I got a call from my in-laws. My mother-in-law was completely unhinged. She started demanding that I call her son back immediately, or at least respond to his messages right that second. I panicked and asked her what was going on. That's when she told me that my husband had called her, crying hysterically. According to her, he'd been sobbing so hard he could barely speak. He told her that now that I was gone, he didn't see the point of living anymore, that he didn't know what to do with himself, that no matter how hard he tried, he'd never have the family and life he'd always dreamed of, and that realization had completely broken him. She said she was terrified he might hurt himself, and that I had to call him immediately. And maybe this sounds cruel, but the moment I heard all of that, something felt off. It sounded less like a mental breakdown and more like a very calculated attempt to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I'd done exactly what any self-respecting woman would do after finding out her husband cheated on her. And now he was turning that into a weapon, painting himself as the victim because he was infertile. So instead of calling him, I told his mother that he could do whatever he wanted because I wasn't his wife anymore. He cheated on me. She was shocked. She told me I was being heartless. I didn't care. I told her that her son brought this on himself and that I was done. Then I hung up before she could waste any more of my time. About an hour ago, my husband texted me again. This time, I finally opened it. He said he was feeling better now and that I didn't need to reply if I didn't want to. But then he immediately followed that up by saying that the way I'd reacted to hearing about his breakdown was nothing short of heartless. He told me that my response made him feel like I'd never loved him at all. Then he went on about how he was suffering too, that it wasn't just me going through a hard time, that he was infertile and would never have kids of his own, and I should have been kinder and more understanding toward him because of that. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to talk to my husband when his mother called me, tried to emotionally blackmail me into coming back after he cheated on me? Update 1 to 3 days later. Before anything else, I just want to thank everyone who responded. The support and kindness genuinely meant a lot to me. Looking back, I understand now that I probably should have left the moment he started blaming me for not getting pregnant. But I'm not someone who gives up on relationships easily unless I'm shown very clearly that they're not worth saving. And he showed me that when he cheated. I didn't go back to him because there was no point. The reason he and his mother kept calling was simple. They were trying to guilt trip and emotionally manipulate me into returning. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I was suffering too, arguably more. I was the one who got cheated on. I was the one who lost her marriage in less than a single day. So for him to even imply that he was the victim here was honestly ridiculous. He wasn't a victim. He was pretending to be one because it made manipulation easier. Because it made me look like the villain for not comforting him after he slept with a woman he'd repeatedly told me meant nothing to him. So no, I'm not quick to forget that. And I'm definitely not quick to forgive it. He's been texting me again nonstop, but I've muted the chat. I haven't opened a single message since the one where he accused me of being cruel. He has a couple of weeks to respond to the divorce petition. I'm sure he'll try everything he can to stop it or convince me to change my mind. What he doesn't know is that I've already emotionally checked out of this marriage. Forgiving him for infertility would have been easy. Forgiving bad behavior would have been possible. But cheating? That's where it ends. Update 2. Today, I had to go back to the house. I realized I'd accidentally left behind an expensive bracelet my dad had gifted me. Forgetting it was a mistake, but at the time I packed my things, my head was a complete mess. I tried to figure out a way to go back when my husband wouldn't be home, but that felt wrong. I wasn't about to sneak into a place that used to be my home like a burglar. So I braced myself and went there after work, not caring whether he'd be there or not. He was. The moment he opened the door, he looked relieved. Happy even. He tried to hug me, clearly not noticing, or choosing not to notice, that I wasn't smiling and wasn't meeting his eyes. I pushed him away and told him I was only there to collect some jewelry, and then I'd be leaving. He looked disappointed and immediately accused me of being heartless. Then he said it was just one incident, and that I was blowing things out of proportion, that I should forgive him and move on instead of making such a big deal out of it. He even had the nerve to say that since he'd eventually confessed, I should at least consider forgiving him, because, apparently, not lying forever deserved credit. I had to fight the overwhelming urge to slap him into another dimension. Instead, I ignored his nonsense. He kept talking about how he had no contact with his ex anymore, as if that was his decision. She was the one who blocked him, not the other way around. He would have happily kept talking to her if I hadn't found out. Once I grabbed the box with my bracelet, I turned to leave. That's when he stepped into the doorway and blocked my exit. He's much taller than me, and for a brief moment, I was genuinely scared. He didn't touch me. He just stood there and told me I had to let him explain. I didn't have much of a choice. So I stood there while he repeated the same excuses I'd already heard, that he'd slept with his ex out of frustration, not desire, that he didn't even like her, that she'd used him. Then he said something that sealed everything for me. He told me that sleeping with his ex had helped him realize how much he loved me, that he wasn't willing to give up on us, that he just needed one more chance, and he'd prove he could be a good husband. I had no intention of giving him anything, but I wanted out of that room, so I told him I'd think about it. That instantly lifted his mood. He stepped aside and let me pass. As I was leaving, he tried to hug me again. I pushed him away again, got into my car, and drove off as fast as I could. I got back about half an hour ago, and I'm still furious that he genuinely believes he deserves a second chance after everything he did. I know he'll try to contest the divorce, but it doesn't matter. He cheated, and I have proof. What's most frustrating is that he still doesn't understand how horrible what he did truly was. Nobody deserves a second chance after that. He blamed me. He made me feel worthless for not being able to conceive when he was the one with fertility issues all along. This divorce couldn't come fast enough. Update 3. My husband now has 1 week left to respond to the petition. I think he's still holding onto the delusion that I'll somehow change my mind, even though I haven't responded to his calls or texts in weeks. Today, I finally texted him back. I told him there was nothing he could say to change my mind, and that he should start looking for a lawyer instead of wasting both our time. He called me immediately and asked if I was serious. I told him yes, absolutely serious. There was no chance in hell I'd take it back after what he did. He tried to argue, to bargain. I was too exhausted to listen. I hung up. I'd warned him. What he does next is his problem. My lawyer and I are already discussing the settlement. If he wants to fall behind, that's on him. I don't care anymore. Update 4. He's not contesting the divorce. We're moving straight to settlement negotiations. I'm expecting a fair division of assets, and honestly, with the evidence I have, it should be straightforward. He hasn't contacted me since our last call. His mother, however, has. She didn't call me. She called my parents. She tried to lecture them about raising a daughter with no sense of duty toward her husband. Apparently, she expected me to forgive one tiny mistake and give him another chance. She clearly didn't know my parents. Instead of being told off, she got told off. They made it very clear that her son was the one who destroyed the marriage and that I was simply doing what was best for myself. That if she wanted to blame someone, she should start with him. I'm grateful my parents are on my side. Soon, our friends will know too. This isn't something I plan on hiding, except for the infertility part. That's no longer my business. I haven't cried in a long time. But now, for the first time, I feel like I can finally breathe. Things are moving in the right direction. Soon, I'll be divorced, and he'll be out of my life for good.